After months of uncertainty, campaigners like you up and down the country have seen off a terrifying spectre: the rail operators' plans to close 1,000 ticket offices. And fittingly, the U-turn came just 2 days ago on Halloween. The impacts would have been devastating. During a cost of living crisis, our fares would have become more expensive, rail stations would have become less accessible for all of us, but particularly those with disabilities. And finally, travelling around by rail would have just become less safe as they destaffed our stations. The people who put it best, to my mind, were the rail workers in the RMT union. Cut their profits, not our ticket offices. And after 750,000 of you resisted the plans, we are now halfway there. Welcome everyone. My name's Matthew and this is We Own It Live. For public ownership. We're here because we believe in public services and that they should be run for people and not just for profit. But we're not just people who believe that. We want to do something about it. So thank you so much for being here with us. It's so important that we can grow our community together, make the case, share information, and get this case in front of as many people as possible. Now, please do put your comments and questions in the chat as the YouTube live goes on, and we'll do our best to get to them in the Q&A. Now, back to today's main topic. You all know that this has been a devastating and worrying issue for months now. And you may well actually have had more experience with it than I have. But we've all been watching the devastating headlines after community group after community group, campaigner after campaigner has come out and named just how devastating closing these ticket offices would be. Now, the plans have been around for months, and we've actually had a months-long extended consultation on these devastating proposals. We knew the results of the consultation would be coming out this Tuesday, but what we didn't know was that within 15 minutes of London Travel Watch and Transport Focus relieving the public of this uncertainty and telling us what the results were, that the governments would announce a U-turn and say that they have instructed the rail operators to cancel these plans. Now, this is not just exciting because it's such an important part of our public services. It's exciting because it shows that even against a really difficult backdrop, a government with a massive majority, plans that they seem dead set on, through organising, we can fight back and we can win. So I'm really delighted to be joined today by Johnbosco, my colleague at We Own It, who's been leading on our campaigning on this. And we have been just one of hundreds of organizations and one of hundreds of thousands of individuals who have been fighting on this. Now, before Johnbosco and I get into the details, we're just going to share a video that shows Johnbosco's immediate reaction to this fantastic news on Tuesday.
Thousands of you responded to the public consultation on the plans to close our ticket offices. The passenger watchdogs have just reported back and have objected to all of the plans to close our ticket offices. And guess what? The government has just responded as well. After months of saying that they are going to allow the ticket offices to go on and be closed, they've just come out and said that they're going to ask the private railway companies to withdraw those plans immediately. This win would not have been possible if not for tens of thousands of people like yourselves, people who have been putting in the work, sending in letters, attending protests, doing all sorts of things that we've been asking you to do to get this win. This is your win. You made it possible. Thank you so much for being involved in this. Now let's go on and fight for a railway that works for people and not these private companies who could care less about ordinary people, about disabled people, about older people, about people with mental health needs, who care more about their profits than they care about human beings. Let's fight for a railway that works for people and not profit.
I remember seeing that earlier this week and being so energized, Johnbosco. I think it was absolutely fantastic summary. But for anyone who maybe hasn't been following this story, what is the threat that people watching have helped fight off just this week? And what does this victory mean for passengers and for the future of our railway?
First of all, thank you so much, everyone who's made the time this evening to join us for another installment of these We Own It Live sessions. And I think, in some ways, this is a special one because quite different from others. We are essentially having a party as opposed to, well, not that we ever have a pity party, but as opposed to a pity party where we are talking about something wrong with the public service. Today, we are celebrating a win that people on this call, of course, campaigners from across all kinds of organizations made happen. And we're going to talk about how that happened. But in terms of what we managed to stop here, I think it's really important. Obviously, a lot of people talk about this issue in terms of how it affects disabled people, how it affects elderly people who are not very technologically kind of dexterous, if you like, how it affects tourists or visitors. I remember when we had a protest in London, I was speaking to a journalist from the Mirror. I was reflecting about how my experience of using the railway system in Britain was massively enhanced by the fact that we had ticket offices when I first came to this country 6.5 years ago, right? So we have kind of tended to focus a great deal on how any plans that cut ticket offices would affect those people. And do not be mistaken at all, it would hit those people really hard, right? Imagine coming into a railway station on a wheelchair, for example, and you don't know where to go to ask for somebody who is going to kind of install the ramp, the kind of temporary ramp that they often install to get you to go into the train with your wheelchair. You don't know where to go to ask for that person in the event you can't find somebody. And of course, the train companies and the government, before this U-turn, had been saying we're going to take the staff who usually are in the ticket offices out of the ticket offices and put them on the platforms. But here is why we did not believe them on that. Regulation currently requires that they have people in the ticket offices, right? That's what the law currently requires. And the effect of what they were trying to do was to scrap any law that required having anybody in there at all, right? So the first step would have been closing the ticket offices with the guise of we're going to have people out here, but the regulation that required them to have people out there at all had been scrapped, right? So in essence, this was a step that ultimately was leading in the direction of not having people out there all the time, right? It's possible that they could have had people there at some of the times that they would characterize as the peak period. But obviously, what they were looking out for more than anything else, and it was quite explicit in the government asking them to find ways to save money, was how to save money and increase their profits. And this was ultimately the direction of travel. And it was really, really important that we were able to stop it for those particularly vulnerable communities. So that was really, really important. But secondly, it's really important, and I think you kind of touched on this a little bit at the beginning, Matthew. You suggested that this would have affected all of us, right? It affects everybody. And I'm reminded by, I think his name is Chris Loder, the MP, I've forgotten where he represents now, speaking in Parliament during the parliamentary debate on this, and the video of him, and we're going to touch a little bit more about that, went viral, received over 1 million views across social media platforms from us. And I know a lot of other organizations would have put that video out and received a lot of views around it as well, of him pointing out kind of in very graphic form how it costs you much more to buy your tickets from the apps than it would to buy your ticket directly from the ticket office. And I remember when I was speaking to the journalist, the Mirror journalist at the protest I mentioned earlier, I said to him that I believe I would have saved up to £1,000 using the ticket office in my time in the UK for the last 6.5 years. And it's quite simple. And obviously it might have looked a bit like an exaggeration, but I thought about it again after saying it, and it felt a bit like I was underplaying it. So somebody's going to play that video just now, but it felt a bit like I was underplaying it a little bit. because in reality, the difference between the people, human beings at the ticket offices telling you what the cheapest ticket to buy is, and the app telling you what the companies running these apps want you to see, essentially, is massive. And this video is really going to illustrate that point.
For rail passengers to get from London to Plymouth, the cheapest way is to travel via London Waterloo and change at Exeter St David's. And you should buy a ticket from Waterloo to Axminster and another ticket from Axminster to Plymouth, which in total will cost you £93.90 return. And if you had a rail card, you would pay just £64.50 return. But right now, if any of you have smartphones, feel free to have a look for yourself. If you entered on your smartphone London to Plymouth, you will be given the option to take the 10:04 from Paddington to Plymouth, which when I checked before this debate, you will be offered a ticket on the train line for a staggering £158.70, almost £100 more than the cheapest alternative, which is actually on the 10:20 from Waterloo to Exeter and then change. If you went to the ticket office, the regulations require that the cheapest ticket is to be sold, and you could indeed buy that cheapest ticket there at the advice of someone in the ticket office.
Amazing, amazing. In black and white, the massive difference that this would make. And the private companies really do not care about us. They just care about their profits. So it was really, really important that we fought this thing off. I did want to make 2 additional points as to what we have in effect managed to fight back. 2 things. One of them is obviously a point that a Tory MP made during the debate that video was from. And it was quite surprising for me that a Conservative MP would say this. But it's a sad day, really, that we are increasingly seeing the disappearance of human beings from public services, right? And not just public services like the trains or all sorts of other public services, but we are seeing the disappearance of human beings from even the private sector services like banking, right? You can do everything you need to do with your banking now without actually seeing anybody at all. I usually make a point of going to the cashier tills myself because I don't really know exactly what I need. Sometimes I need the person who I meet there to tell me what I need. I can't just figure it out by looking at a screen. But it's really, really important that we have been able to push back this ideology of cutting human beings out of human services, right? And this is such an important fight that we have, at the very least, in this particular form, won. And the last thing I wanted to say as well is that it was really important as well that we won this fight to show to these private railway companies that we're not just going to accept their kind of profiteering ways in our system. This showed more than anything else that they've done in the last number of years that they cared far less about the human beings who actually ride the trains than they care about their profits. And it was important that we defeat them on this fight, just so we can show them that we're not just going to lie down and take whatever the hell they want to do. And in the same way, we're not going to lie down and continue to let them run our trains. That's why, of course, as Matthew pointed out, this is just halfway there, right? The full cost of this meal is winning this fight and getting them out of our railway system entirely.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that perfectly sums up the challenge that we've got, but something that we know we can win because we have just won the first part of this fight. And that's maybe something I'd like to come to next, Johnbosco, just to kind of talk through some of those tactics and some of those approaches that we used at We Own It and with campaigners that we work alongside, but also in this kind of wider movement that brought together hundreds of groups to fight against this change. So how have we gone about fighting off these profit-seeking companies?
You know, before this call, I spent a bit of time, I spent like 30 minutes which is a long time for me to spend doing nothing except thinking about the answer to this question. Obviously, we approach this fairly strategically in the way we approach pretty much all of our campaigning. But I don't think, obviously, that we on it alone was capable of getting this win, right? It was important that everyone come together to be a part of this fight. And the one expression that kept coming to my mind about how we got this win was working together, right? We saw Tory MPs in Parliament making incredibly strong statements, asking their government to withdraw these plans, which we did not say. Sometimes people who see themselves as quote unquote on the left will reject something good that's said by a conservative MP just because it's not the right person saying it. What we did in this campaign was we took that statement made by that Tory MP and we blew it up, right? This video that was just shared, I actually didn't realize until very recently, had received over 1 million views on We On It social media channels, right? So, and obviously there were other videos as well from people like Mark, Francois, and others. Videos that received hundreds of thousands of views, that helped get the word to people who would usually not listen to quote unquote left-wing voices. But it was very important for us to get this message out to them, because the only way that we win this fight, this really important and difficult fight, is by bringing everyone together. The unions did an incredibly important job on this as well. I remember a few months ago, I organized a meeting with all of the unions, all of the rail unions, the RMT, the TSSA, and ASLEF, where we kind of planned potentially an action. At the end of the day, we had that action at the Department for Transport. If Imogen is going to share some of the pictures. So this is a picture from that action. And you can see the We On It logo prominently on there. I just wanted to point out as well, the person who's actually holding the We On It banner there is from DPAC, what was the full name of the Disabled People Against Cuts. That's right. I've forgotten her name now. She's an incredibly powerful voice speaking for disabled people, and she gave a speech at that rally. We had ASLEF, of course. We had the TSSA. We didn't have a lot of comrades from the RMT, because I think they were also planning a protest the Thursday after this action. So I think it was really, really important that we were able to take action in that kind of coordinated way. We submitted a letter to Mark Harper at this action, a letter that outlined the effects of this on ordinary people, on disabled people, on older people. And it's quite useful. I did want to if you want to move to the next picture. Yes, and this was, I went to a picket line of the RMT, where we're handing out their forms prepared for the consultation. They made sending out the consultation incredibly easy. All you had to do is have this form, put in your information, answer a bunch of questions, and put it in the post box. I actually picked up around 200 or so of those here from this picket line, took them back to Oxford, and distributed all of them in Oxford. We also, of course, sent out an email to our email list to almost 130,000 people, who tens of thousands of whom filled out the consultation as well. So it was really, really important that every element of people who care about our railway system, who are not just in it for the money, as opposed to being in it for the people, came together and fought against this kind of this profiteering drive by the private companies. If we go to the next picture, and all of this was obviously really, really important, but something that was also very, very important was the press. The Mirror was incredible. So this was the first paper that they published on. I think they launched the campaign, and this was the first paper that they published on the campaign. And in the middle, and they quoted us in that article, obviously. And when I went to the action the next day, they actually had me carry this newspaper, and they took a picture of me. And the next day, they wrote a story about our protest, and there was a picture of me in there. It was, in some ways, the goofiest picture of me that I've ever seen. But it was really good because it helped us get the word out there to the hundreds of thousands of people who read the Mirror that this was a really important campaign that they need to get involved in. And I think that we all understood one thing about winning this fight. If a public consultation is ever put on the table, it is very rare that they go against that consultation. Usually their best hope of putting forward a public consultation is that nobody hears about it and that they're able to use it to stitch up the process. But the moment they put it forward, I think we all understood that this is our path to winning, right? You might remember there was also the public consultation on the sell-off of Channel 4, the privatization of Channel 4. We also got hundreds of thousands of people to respond to that, alongside organizations like 38 Degrees. And of course, we also managed to get them to withdraw those plans to sell off Channel 4. And in the same way, the RMT, We Own It, and a whole bunch of other organizations organized and got 750,000 people to respond to this consultation. It was the biggest public consultation in British history, right? That tells you how much people cared about this issue. So it was really, really important that we were strategic. We were open-minded about bringing together everybody, even people that we would not traditionally be on the same side as. And we worked together to achieve this objective. So in some ways, it's really important that we achieve this win for the win itself, right? The fact that we actually stopped the closure of our ticket offices. But even more importantly, or perhaps just as importantly, for the next step of this fight, is the fact that we were able to bring together so many people to win this fight, right? And those people now hopefully are a lot more open because they have now seen that these private companies do not have their interests at heart, are now more willing to put their kind of their mouths where their hearts are, to say, well, we are not going to accept private companies putting their interests before our interests on our railway system anymore.
Absolutely. And I'd love to pick up on that theme in just a minute and explore it a bit more. But one of the key things that you were saying in that section, Johnbosco, about how we won this, bringing people together, that's different groups, but it's also just numbers. And on that front, we want to be able to build our platform for sharing information about how to take action, about why we need to take action. And so if you haven't done already, do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel and take part in future YouTube lives and share those. And actually just today, do keep popping your questions in the chat, and I'll hopefully share some of those with Johnbosco later. I've seen some great ones going in already. But on that point you were just talking about, Johnbosco, about how we move to this next stage of the fight, get something that works for people and not just for profit. What we're looking to do as part of that is deliver fully publicly owned rail network. But what does a fully publicly owned rail network look like? And what are some of the advantages going to be? How can we take those people who've been energized by the threat of the ticket offices closing and say, we needed to defend these against cuts, and we need to make sure that what now gets cut is the profits of private companies, and that we can use that under public ownership to fund our services. So would you talk us through a little bit of what that vision is for the next stage of this?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the advantages of what has just happened is that usually when we talk about private companies playing a role in our public services, we warn people about the effects of it. I remember quite vividly when we launched our campaign around Centene, the multinational American company, taking over 37 GP surgeries in London. I think it was in February of 2021. And we were warning, and I remember I wrote a blog then. If you you will find it on our website, of 3 reasons why Centene is bad for your local GP surgery, I think is what it's titled. And I pointed out the fact that obviously they're going to close down GP surgeries if they're not profitable. They're going to find ways to get rid of highly qualified GPs and bring in physician associates who are much less qualified and also much less paid, because for them, all that matters is cutting costs and maximizing profit. And usually when you talk about things in this way, it often seems to people like you are theorizing about what might happen, right? We all know that not every single one of those things that we suggested would happen have now happened. All of those things are even being spread a lot more in the NHS. So it might often seem theoretical, but this was an example. The campaign on ticket offices was an example where it was not difficult at all to show people that this is actually real, right? It's not theory. We're not saying that the private companies are going to close your ticket offices if you let them in. What we are saying is they have proposed that they want to close your ticket offices if you let that they're in, right? And it's there in black and white. The government asked them, find ways to cut costs. They have decided one of the ways to cut costs is to cut this incredibly valuable service to people, right? So it was not a very theoretical thing at all. Now, in terms of the question of what would a fully publicly owned railway system look like and what are some of the advantages of it, I did want to start by talking about essentially the different elements of the railway system, right? I can talk all day about, say, for example, nationalization of energy. And when you want to talk about nationalization of energy, you have to talk about 4 different things, right? Supply and distribution and transmission and so on and so forth. And it's something with the rail system, right? It's not one thing. It's 3 different things at the very least, right? You could break it up into even smaller pieces, but there are 3 different elements to it, which we don't necessarily think need to be 3 different elements. They have mainly been broken up into 3 different elements just so they can each be separately sold off, right? So you have the trains themselves, right? The carriages that carry people from point A to point B. The companies that run them are not the same as the companies that own them, right? So the companies that own them, of course, we call them the rolling stock companies. And that sector is dominated by 3 companies who in 2021 paid out about £1 billion in profits to their shareholders, in dividends to their shareholders, right? So those are the 3 companies that own largely the trains that run on our rail tracks. So that's one kind of company, the rolling stock companies. And obviously, we don't believe that there is any special, we used to run our trains very well before they sold off the assets to these private companies. One of the theoretical advantages of selling off the assets to these private companies is that they're going to invest and they're going to buy state-of-the-art modern technology, modern trains. But I don't know how many of us have been using the train recently. Do those look like 2023 trains to you? Right? Instead of investing in buying new modern trains, they're paying out billions of pounds in profits to their shareholders, right? So that's one thing we need to stop. We need to get back our rolling stock, get the private companies out of that entirely. The second kind of companies in the system are what are technically called train operating companies, right? TOCs. And these are companies like Southeastern is now in public ownership. Companies like Trans-Pennine Express. Trans-Pennine Express is also now in public ownership. All right, so I'm going to, obviously I set up that joke because I wanted to make the point about how the train operating companies have been failing systematically for so many years now. And even this conservative government that would not want to nationalize anything has been forced to take a good number of those services back into public hands. But those are the train operating companies, the companies that actually run the trains on on the tracks. They hire the trains from the rolling stock companies. They staff them and all of that, right? So those are the train operating companies. And obviously, they also pay out huge amounts of profits to their shareholders. They've been hamstrung a little bit and obviously been fed by public subsidies during the pandemic. And even during that pandemic period, while they were receiving over £10 billion in subsidies from the public, they were paying out something like £100 million in dividends to their shareholders, right? So it's incredible how poorly these companies can manage to run service. And we've been talking about what's that company now? I forget it. Sorry, I have a terrible memory. This company that recently had their contract extended despite having such a terrible record. And it was a company that we've been campaigning that the government take into public ownership, and fingers crossed we're going to succeed on that in that fight as well. Yes, and these are the companies that are essentially running down our railway system effectively. So that's the second part of things. That's the kind of middle part of things. Then there is a third part of things. That is the kind of what I like to describe as the train station and facilities management section of things, right? So the train tracks themselves, the train stations, and a lot of the kind of repairs and maintenance infrastructure of our railway system. Those were also privatized for some time. And some of you will remember that between 1997 and 2002, I believe, there were 3 or 4 major train catastrophes in this country. All of those happened during privatization, right? I literally had to Google it this afternoon just to make sure that none of them happened outside of privatization. And it was after our rail system was privatized and these accidents happened, the Tony Blair government or the Labour government decided to take that part of the system back into public ownership, right? So that's what we call Network Rail today. And since then, we have not had a major train catastrophe, right? And that tells you something about how profit really isn't all that matters in this system. But for these private companies, profit is all that matters, right? So it's really, really important that across the spectrum of services that our rail system offers, that we're able to make sure that putting people first is the ethos of the providing the services that they do, from who is responsible for buying the trains. If it's a public body that's accountable to passengers, then they're going to want to keep things up to date. If it's a private companies, they're going to want to string out the lifetime of a train for as long as they can before they replace it, right? I mean, you go to some of these train companies and they're using trains that look like they've been there for 30 years, right? So it's from that level of who owns the literal trains to the level of who is running the trains on the tracks to the level of who owns the tracks and who's maintaining the tracks, it's really, really important that the passenger is put first across the spectrum of the service. And it's obviously, we know that this works better because we stand to save a great deal of money that's currently going out in profits. At the very least, 1 billion, according to an analysis by the RMT, £1 billion could be saved every single year if we cut privatization out of the system entirely. Imagine what that money could do for the railway system, right? We could theoretically cut rail fares by 18%, right? Every year, in effect, not cutting it by 18% every single year, but we could cut our rail fares by 18% on a particular year, right? We could invest in building more tracks, updating the trains, putting people before kind of the interests of these private companies. So obviously we know that the best railway system in Europe, from the Swiss, is fully publicly owned. All we have to do is look at how they run their railway system. It's the cheapest. We have the most expensive railway system to ride in Europe. They have one of the cheapest, right? And so it's really, really important that we put that in our railway system, we put people before profit. And I think that winning this fight that we've just managed to win kind of puts us on a really good kind of stead to be able to make the case to those people who are now more interested in what happens with our railway system, to say to them, this is just halfway. The full hug is to say, well, what do we need these private companies for? Right? There was a time when we didn't have them in the system. Things were not perfect, but at the very least, we knew that we had some accountability over the system. And we're not saying let's go back to the 1970s public ownership of rail. We want a 21st century public ownership in our railway system that gives a voice to passengers, gives a voice to local authorities, and that gives a voice to people, to the public, as opposed to the profit-making companies.
Absolutely, Johnbosco. And I mean, there's so much there, but we saw a comment popping up about how important it is to get this history out, because by learning this history, we can make the case to people that right now we know that we are being failed by this privatized system, like we were failed by privatized rail track, like we're failed in private services elsewhere. And I think just take a moment to dwell on this absurd system where they broke something that needs to be integrated, our public transport system, up into 3 different bits and sold it off to different people. You know, just what a ridiculous way to try and run an essential service. Now, we've had some fantastic questions coming in, and so we're going to move to the Q&A section now. And one that we've had actually come in basically twice from both John Wally and Ram is that what lessons can we be drawing from this victory? And I think this shows how energized people are. What lessons can we be drawing from this victory on the ticket officers campaign for other campaigns, whether it's fighting privatization in the NHS, trying to take back control of our buses, our waterways? What can we be learning, Johnbosco, from this?
I think that's a really, really important question. And I think it's not I don't think it's a question that we could answer kind of in a complete and done way. We have to continue to kind of think about what we've learned from this and continue to apply whatever lessons we get. But for me, at the very least, what I've learned from this is the importance of bringing people together and finding ways to appeal to people around a particular aim, around a particular set of demands, but appealing to people in the way that they would find the most appealing, right? You can obviously easily approach somebody who votes conservative and say to them, we need to get private companies out of our railway system because what would be a terrible way to appeal to them on this issue? I'm not sure, because we don't use terrible arguments, but I don't know what, because that's what Marx and Lenin would have liked, right? So that's a terrible way to appeal to them, because that's not going to appeal to them, right? We need to find arguments that's going to appeal to as many people as possible. And on this issue, for example, the argument of it's going to cost you literally more money in your pocket to buy train tickets if you don't have ticket offices at your train station. Really, really tangible argument that can appeal to everybody. Tories want money in their pockets as much as Labour voters want money in their pockets, right? And of course, making sure that your tent, in terms of your strategy, not in terms of your demand should be clear and it should be what you want. But in terms of your strategy, your tent should be as wide as possible, right? This was a campaign that we won, not by bringing together all of the most left-wing people in the country. It was a campaign that we won by bringing everyone together, right? By spreading a video by conservative MPs, to sharing things that are said or done by Labour Party MPs, by usual left-wing MPs like Zara Sultana or Andy, people like Andy Burnham, who spoke up against this really vociferously, right? So it's really important in terms of strategy to bring people together, right? Think outside of the box that you exist within. And it's a challenge, right? It's not easy. It's something that I have to continuously remind myself to do all the time. And also, of course, making sure that others have an opportunity to offer feedback on kind of my thought process, and that's, I think, a very important exercise of kind of trying to make sure others are able to see whether or not this message works, whether or not this strategy works across the board for everybody, not just people within our our circle. That would be kind of the primary lesson that I learned from it, that it's really important in terms of the strategy to have as broad a tent as possible.
Absolutely, that's really strong. But the kind of a couple of thoughts that you raised there actually, I think, bridge to one of the other questions we've had asked, which is, what was it about this consultation or this campaign that encouraged record numbers of responses? And I think you've already answered it, Johnbosco, in your comment there. I mean, it's something that there's multiple answers to, but one of the key ones is this issue, this campaign, it met people where they are. People need to use public transport to get around in their day-to-day lives. It's one of our kind of essential parts of our experience. And so being able to say to them, there are these proposals coming down the line, they're driven by profit, and they will impact you in these ways, that really made people go, okay, there's a problem that I need to solve here, and I know how it would affect my life. And then they were given a really clear way to stop it happening, a consultation. So I think that was a really compelling answer that you kind of preempted there for this question as well. And we'll maybe just take one final question, which is one that I actually don't. Yeah, Johnbosco, come in.
Can I just quickly reiterate a point that you make there? I think it was also really important that people saw the path from what you're asking them to do to the win that you want them to, that we're going to achieve, right? And you might remember the video that we started this off with when I was kind of celebrating our win, and I said something about all of the actions that we've been asking you to do in order to get this win, right? And that was not just me using words for the sake of using words. It was literally, I was literally thanking everyone for doing the things that we told you to do that would get the win, right? We didn't just ask you to do things for the sake of doing things. We tried to convince people that if you do A is going to produce B effect, which is going to lead to the outcome that we want, right? And people are more likely to take action if they are able to see that line themselves. They can't just trust you that, well, I'm going to do this because it said I should do it, but I don't really know if it's going to work. All right. One of the things I learned was it's really important to convince that person as well that if they do this, it's going to produce this effect. And obviously, we know that it has. We have manifold evidence that when you respond to a consultation on Channel 4, for example, on rail ticket offices, and it's not just responding to it that's the key. I think the key is doing so in such great numbers that it's impossible for them to ignore you, because if they did ignore you, it's going to look really bad, right? So if the numbers of people who responded wasn't very big, it would have been possible for them to ignore. But if they did ignore this, and the press would have said they ignored the result of the biggest public consultation in British history, right? I don't think any government wants to do that.
Absolutely not. That's another really compelling answer to that question. And I think you've teed up a bit of a challenge for me there, Johnbosco, because we're going to move to our action of the week for this week. And that's to sign and importantly share the petition calling for our rail network to come into public ownership. And why is this going to help win? Well, it's going to help win because A, we need to show those vast numbers supporting this, which helps us go to MPs and say, we need you to introduce a bill to bring this forward or to change government policy in this way. But it also helps us build up a bank of people who all share the same vision, which is a rail network that works for people and not just for profit. And so the link for that petition should be in the chat below this stream. And so go there, sign, and importantly share, so we can grow that movement to win off the back of this fantastic victory we've seen this week. So thank you so much, Johnbosco, for talking us through what has been so exciting this week. Something, as one of the comments in the chat shows, really gives you a little bit of a tonic when a lot of the news is very heavy at the minute. So thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you for all the campaigning you've been doing to make this happen. Please do subscribe so that we can build up our support for these ideas and get more folks involved in the campaign, explore our channel, watch other videos, because that'll help other people find them, and sign up on our website as well for our email newsletter list. So remember, folks, if there's anything we've talked about, there's probably a link to it in the description, and you can find out how to get involved there. And we will be back on the 7th of December at 5 p.m. for another YouTube Live. So thank you everyone so much, and see you then.